Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Commander Pod, your Magic the Gathering podcast for all things Commander. My name is Kelton Howell.
And I'm Spencer Simpson. This week, we are talking all about counterspells. We're going to talk about which ones to play, when to use them, and how to get the most out of them in Commander, and also how to not feel as salty when you get your stuff countered. Because counterspells are they're a core part of what makes Magic. Interacting on the stack is like a Magic exclusive environment thing.
Spencer, as a Sultai mage, I think you're the one probably on the other end of the salt most of the time, if I had to guess.
This is propaganda from me to say, quit being so salty when I counter your stuff.
Yeah, it happens, though, because counterspells are a core part of what makes Magic, and more specifically, what makes blue. And honestly, like mechanically, it's really cool. This last week, we're actually teaching one of our friends how to play Magic. We started them off with Commander, which is always really tough. And it's crazy to watch their brains just explode when they learn about the stack and when they learn about instant speed and how interactive Magic is. And counterspells are a huge part of that. So we hope that no matter whether you love them or hate them, that you are going to learn something new about counterspells this week.
Yes, absolutely. So let's talk about the origination of counterspells, which is the original counterspell.
Can I quiz you on this, Spencer? I'm going to quiz you, but I want the original text on the alpha counterspell.
Well, I'm looking at the non-alpha and it says counter target spell. I'm guessing it doesn't say that.
That is not correct. Yeah.
It probably says put target spell in its owner's discard.
Oh, that was a good guess. That is not how it is templated, but that is a good guess.
Okay.
The original counterspell reads, well, it's blue for an interrupt because instants weren't a thing at that time.
Yes, of course.
But it says counters target spell as it's being cast.
Yes.
Which is really interesting.
Yeah, anyways, they moved from passive verbiage to active verbiage, which I think is a good
I think that was a very good move. Yeah, but since then there have been a lot of different variations on cards that counter spells, but it has remained, like I said, that kind of core piece of Blue's identity. And I think it's really important to remember, especially if you're not a Blue player and you sometimes feel bad when your stuff gets countered, that counters are one of the primary ways that Blue can interact with things. I don't think there's any enchantment removal in Blue. Is that correct?
I think
only things I think there's one that steals an enchantment, and I think there's one that copies an enchantment, and I think that's it.
Yeah, I'd have to look it up because I'd have to remember what some of the ones that like replace it with like elementals and stuff. But I think I might only hit artifacts and creatures.
Yeah.
Does Reality Shift I think Reality Shift hits a permanent. Nope, it is a creature. Yep, yeah. I don't know.
It's tough. It's tough out there for Blue sometimes. So counterspells are one of the ways that Blue can just interact with other colors and different types of cards.
Yeah, that has been something that I've been thinking about a little bit recently, and is one of my gripes against the anti-Blue, anti-counterspell propaganda. Is like sometimes it's hard for me to understand why nowadays with like enter the battlefield effects being so prevalent, I think I understand it a little bit more.
Sure.
And the fact that you can sometimes you can activate the abilities of an artifact or whatever when it enters or what have you. And I guess that maybe you expect your instant or sorcery to resolve a lot of the time. But if you're casting like a creature spell or an artifact or an enchantment, there's also a world where, I don't understand the difference between, hey, I counter that and it never hits the battlefield, and it hits the battlefield and you're casting your next thing and I Cross and Grip or something like that. You know what I mean?
I think I want to talk about this because I do think there is something about counterspells that can feel less casual in a casual format like Commander. I think it's just the feeling that you spend resources on something, you spend a card on something, and it never even resolves. I think there's something about the fact that it doesn't resolve that can have an emotional impact on another player. And I think that's why people feel salty about counterspells. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, so, okay, we have a friend, they just played a Rowan Scion of War deck, right?
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes you can give Rowan haste, but sometimes you can't, so you have to cast Rowan and wait to untap, right?
Sure.
I don't think, like, I don't, aside from having the hope for several turns that it might make it back to your turn, like, I don't understand the difference between I counter Rowan and, it gets back to your turn and I Swords to Plowshares Rowan. I know Swords to Plowshares, like, gains you life or whatever, but, like,
Yeah.
what X removal spell just, like, gets rid of Rowan. So but I do understand what you're saying, and I think it's different in terms of, well, maybe I have something that draws me cards when my artifact enters the battlefield, and so I want this artifact to enter, and then I draw a card, and then if it dies, it doesn't matter. Or
Definitely. It definitely debuffs a lot of like ETB effects.
Yeah. Which can be a problem, and there's ways that like a lot of decks play things that will protect their creatures from removal. So they might play a heroic intervention, or they might play like a snakeskin veil or something.
Yeah.
Right. And so they have ways to deal with on board interaction, but not ways to deal with on the stack interaction. And I think that probably can cause some frustration as well. But I do think we need to part of the point of this episode, and I think the part I'm excited to talk about when we get there, is to help make ourselves less sensitive to counter magic, because it is like how blue we said, how blue can interact primarily.
I think it also plays a really important part in the ecosystem of Magic, because yes, Commander is a casual format, but there's a scale to casualness in Commander, right? We have lower power decks, we have higher power decks, and counterspells have a relationship with that scale. Because if we think about threat levels, we did an episode. Did you know that we did that episode on threat levels almost a year ago? It's almost been a year since we did that episode. Yeah, it's crazy, huh? So we did an episode on threat levels, and we talked about different tiers of threats, how there's like tier 0, tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3, where tier 3, it's like, oh, yeah, that thing's going to be a problem, but like it doesn't need to be removed for the next couple of turns. Like we can wait a couple turns and we'll probably still be fine. Tier 0 is, this can't even hit the battlefield. Like this has to be countered now, right? Like it might be a spell, like a massive torment of hailfire that like it can't resolve. It needs to be removed on the stack. Or maybe it is a creature with a big ETB ability that we can't let resolve. Or we know they have protection. They'll be able to protect it once it hits the battlefield. So the only thing that can answer those kinds of threats are counterspells. So you want counterspells at the table. And as you move up in power level, higher power decks are going to have more of those like tier 0 threats, more of those threats that need counter magic in order to interact with them. So like, as bad as it can feel when you're the one that gets countered, you're also so grateful when it's the Torment of Hailfire player getting countered and you don't lose the game.
Yeah, and to when you get to those higher power levels, that means you also need to make a higher proportion of your deck, if you're playing blue, things that can interact on the stack. Now that doesn't apply to things that aren't like blue decks, and I think that's, I mean, we're talking about counterspells today, so we're not going to talk about that as much, but I think it is kind of funny that like as you get in higher power levels, blue kind of becomes responsible for making sure people aren't going crazy in Commander. Yeah. Like, and everything else just gets to boat race because they're like, I'm not playing blue, so that's your problem. You know?
Yeah, we've talked about how in CDH, most decks have blue, right?
Yeah, and the ones that don't often are just like washing their hands of any situation that's going on and hoping
they're like, I'm just going to be the problem. I'm not going to try and take care of the problem.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So they let everyone else take care of each other and then and then try to find their window to win. In casual, I don't know if that applies as much, and I think as you move up, you have more interaction. Right?
Yeah.
You just play more interaction, because the more interaction that you have, the more often you can deal with, even if you can't counter spells, you can deal with threats that need to be removed as soon as possible, and in that way you can interact with like a Toxtril the Corrosive, so it doesn't make it a full turn cycle, or like stuff like that.
Yeah. So to answer the question,
should we read Toxtril the Corrosive? No, I'm just kidding.
we haven't done it in a while. Should we read Gary?
Yeah, Gary the Snail. No. I'm just kidding. Let's keep going.
Yeah. So the question you might be asking yourself is, okay, like, I get it. Like, as you move up in power level, you might run more counterspells, but what does that actually look like? How many counterspells should you run? obviously so many factors that go into that, but I think that we can like give a general point of view on that. If we take a look at our deck building template, we recommend starting with 13 pieces of interaction overall for a mid-power deck, and that number goes up for higher power decks, goes down for lower power decks. And among that interaction, I think it's pretty appropriate for mid to high power decks to have counterspells account for up to half of that interaction. It's like 6 to 8 on kind of the top end. But for low to mid power decks, I don't think you need that much. I think like maybe 2 to 3 if you're playing blue and you're playing like a low to mid, because honestly, they're not that good. If you like, they're really good at at answering those threats that have to be answered on the stack. But otherwise, it's important to remember that in Commander, you're actually at a disadvantage when you play a counterspell, right?
Yes, but I don't know if I agree with you of them not being that good. So as you're reading these numbers 6 to 8, we kind of ran through this script right before we started recording, and I thought, yeah, that sounds about reasonable. And as we've been talking about this, that seems like, I mean, that's a lot. But I think for a high power deck, like a high bracket 3 or like bracket 4, I think that is like, in bracket 4 is certainly the minimum amount probably you'd want. But in a high bracket 3, I think that's probably pretty appropriate for high bracket 3. But I think you're right. 2 to 3 is where I've typically landed for like my low to mid power decks. And I think 2 is typically, like I probably run 3 sometimes.
And if everyone runs 2, then someone will probably have one when the big threat goes off, and you need to answer it.
Sure. Here's the thing that I think about counterspells. I know it's a 1-for-1 trade, right?
Yeah, and generally you are up on mana, and that's the only like advantageous thing about it is like your counterspell costs less than their 6 drop.
Yes, but I will say that any sort of like targeted removal is the same rate.
It's so true.
Is the same rate and can't be used like proactively to protect yourself. And I think that is the part that makes counterspell. And part of the reason I really like counterspells, and part of the reasons I've stayed away from counterspells as much, is because they do both. You either stop someone's giant threat from hitting the board, or keep your giant threat on the board for as long as possible.
Sure, because they double as both removal and protection in that way.
Yeah, depending on the counterspells you run, and we're going to talk about which ones we think you should be running later.
I will say, though, I do stand by my statement that they are less efficient in Commander than they are in 1v1.
100% less efficient in Commander than they are in 1v1. Still probably the most efficient interaction.
Still pretty good.
Yeah. They're pretty insane.
Yeah. Well, they just hit different things. I mean, I think that's the value of counterspells. Like, yeah, they're efficient, but they just do a completely different job than other pieces of interaction. Like you said, like there's a little bit of overlap with removal and protection, but like protection and removal for the most part don't do anything for something that's happening on the stack. Right?
Yes, and they can't blow out like other ones do. So like if someone casts a board wipe, and heroic intervention is way better for you to prevent the board wipe happening than a counterspell. But a counterspell effectively does the same thing and can also deal with another thing depending on the counterspells you're running. And we'll get to that in a second. But I do think they're very good.
Yeah, I do think they're very good. Yeah, so you probably want to play 6 to 8 and maybe move up from there for mid to high power, and then 2 to 3 for like low to mid power. The rest of your interaction should be used for stuff like removal, board wipes, protection, etc. And it's important to remember that like whatever your strategy is of your deck, it's going to determine how many counters you want to run. Because if you're a spell slinger deck, like you should run more counters. If you're in multiple colors, you should run probably fewer counters because there's other stuff that those colors can lend to your suite of interactions. So you're probably just not going to be running half of. If you're in 4 colors, you're not going to be running counterspells for half of your interaction, right?
Yeah, I mean, I will say though, the more we talk about this, the more I how
am I just convincing you to play more counterspells? Is that what's happening here?
Well, what I was about to say is, going into this episode, I was like, man, maybe I need to play more counter magic. And the more we talk about it, the more I'm convinced that they're exceptionally powerful. And I don't really want to play very many counterspells in my decks.
Okay.
Because I really have appreciated having to go for other options. Because I feel like when you play counterspells, it feels like you just can't lose. Do you know what I mean? Like, because you can just stop
You can keep
interaction.
protecting yourself over
You
and
can keep
over
protecting
and over
yourself.
and over.
Yeah, exactly. And depending on how many you run or whatever. And that's not true. Like you don't always have a counter spell, but they are just like so powerful. And I really like, and don't get me wrong, I love flexibility. And that's part of the reason I love counter spells. I was just talking about Final Showdown, which is that has the flexibility of being protection or a board wipe
Yep.
or both or a dress down, so it does a
Yep.
bunch of things. So I love the flexibility of those, but I've really enjoyed trying to find a balance of non-counterspell interaction to be able to deal with threats and also be able to proactively protect my things. And that's kind of, I think, where I've been indexing more recently. Though
And that's
I think
also
at the end of
because
this
you've
episode,
been
maybe I'll play a little bit more.
indexing. You've also been indexing on slightly lower power decks recently. Like most of
True.
your casual decks, you've been moving to lower power because you're also indexing more on CEDH. And I feel like that's like pushing your high power stuff just more into CEDH and like your lower power stuff. And like everything at mid just to like low to mid to keep it casual with your other play group.
Yeah, 100%. When I think of a deck that I want to build and I think, wow, this is cool, maybe I'll build it at high power. It's often a commander that like sees CDH play and I'm like, well, like, okay, well, I don't know why I just don't like make this my next CDH deck,
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
So yeah, that's exactly what's been happening for sure.
Cool. All right. Well, let's talk about when to use counterspells. When's the right time to fire off those 2 blue pips? Like we talked about, assess the threat level of whatever it is that you're trying to interact with. Like obvious targets are threats that lose you the game now. If this spell resolves, do you inevitably lose? Yeah, then yes, that's a great thing to counter. I think the other thing to think about is like what are threats that would be difficult for you to face later on. Someone, I don't remember where I heard this. I wish I could remember. I'm sure it was on another podcast. They talked about when you're looking around the table and you're trying to pick who to target. Maybe you have open attacks. You're trying to figure out who to attack, or you have some removal. You got to remove some stuff from the board. Think like, which deck would I struggle to win against 1v1? Because a lot of games end up with a player or two getting out, and then a 1v1 or a 3-player scenario, and you want that eventuality to be a good matchup for you. So if I know, oh my gosh, like this game is headed in a way where it's like it might be me and Spencer as the last 2 in the game, and I'm not going to be able to deal with this spell that he's casting at that point, then I may want to consider countering it now and planning a little bit further down the road.
Yeah, I do think that is one of the pitfalls of counterspells, and I think one of the things that makes them feel bad sometimes from a player feelings perspective, but also B, something that makes them feel bad from a mechanical perspective is that threat assessment. It ties really heavily into how effective counterspells are. And having good threat assessment. And so, and that's a level of threat assessment I hadn't really thought about. I do like the first thing that you mentioned, which is that it may not be obvious to everybody, but I think the obvious targets should be the things that are going to make you lose the game, right?
Yes.
And sometimes that's hard to tell. Like, I think sometimes that means you want to counter a Kindred Discovery, right? Maybe you want to counter a Kindred Discovery because that's going to lose you the game. Right, they're going to draw a million cards.
I've lost to many a Kindred Discovery.
Yeah, exactly. But also that looks like someone resolving, I don't know, like a giant Eldrazi that they can give haste or whatever, and they can sneak in and make you sacrifice stuff. I don't know what people are casting to win games these days. But what happens, what I've seen happen a lot with people that are playing counterspells is that they have open mana and they have a counterspell, and someone casts a spell that's moderately effective, and they go, "Oh no!" and then they counter that thing.
Yeah,
because they have open mana, and it's so much better to just always have open mana and just kind of play one turn behind with your counterspell.
Yeah,
than it is to utilize all of your mana for a turn and then tap out the next turn, and then have someone play something that actually wins the game. Like someone play their Rise of the Dark Realms the next turn or something.
Totally. We've talked about like how powerful playing at instant speed is in Commander. And it's funny how stuff like leaving open counter magic encourages you to play more stuff at instant speed. Because like a really good way to play counterspells and to use counterspells is to always give yourself other things to do with the unused counterspell mana so that you can activate something, cast another spell, just brainstorm, whatever it is, if you don't cast your counterspell. Because it feels bad to play a counterspell just because you don't want to waste the mana, like you said.
Yeah, absolutely. Because of that, I've been leaning more into commanders with like mana sinks or trying to play like more instant speed draw effects, which are printing just so many of these days. Like
Many.
It's
yeah,
crazy.
it's
like
awesome.
Quick Study is just like a strictly better. I forget what the name of the
Divination.
Divination. Yeah, just strictly better divination effect. It's crazy.
It is crazy. Yeah. So threat level. I think obvious threats are the first place to use your counterspells. We talked about early on how flexible counterspells are. They can also protect your own stuff. You can protect a win. You can protect against an asymmetrical setback. You can just keep your game plan moving with confidence, knowing that if someone tries to interrupt you, you can stop them. And that's a pretty good feeling. And that's just kind of how control decks play, right? Just trying to keep their own game plan going over a longer period of time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I'm gonna keep saying it. I think counterspells are very good. they're incredibly good because they do both of those things, right? They keep you winning and prevent others from winning, and that's really, really good.
Yeah. Some other tips. I think we have some other tips for how to use counterspells. One that I like is that you should try and use a counterspell as many times as you can before you actually cast it. And what I mean by that is counter magic is often very telegraphed. Like when the blue player leaves 2 mana up or 3 mana, everyone at the table is a little suspicious and knows that there could be a counterspell coming. That's not a disadvantage in many cases. In many cases, it prevents people from running out their big threats because they're afraid of getting countered. So in a way, every time someone doesn't play that threat, you're getting value out of your counterspell without even having to cast it.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen people like show somebody their counter magic. This happened to me in my tournament. Someone was like, "Hey, I've got a force of will, and I'll counter this stuff." It's like, okay. And I think on the flip side, the best thing to do is just be like, "Cool," and call them on it.
Force them to counter it.
Yeah, absolutely. Because there's going to be better stuff to counter later, and either they have to like show they mean business and counter your thing, and then they can't counter your next thing, or they come to their senses and realize that whatever you're casting isn't as impactful as someone like putting a win on the stack or something. So it's but that's something I want to get better about in casual, and it's like, but I've never been particularly good at is just saying, hey, listen, I know you're trying to like do something crazy here. I have a counterspell. I won't counter this if you do something else. You know what I mean? Or if you target somebody else. Or
I always think about how funny that would be in context of like a 2-player Magic game. Like that kind of communication in politicking just doesn't exist.
No, because you just get them. You just
get them.
I got
Which is why I think counterspells are so good in 1v1, right?
Yeah,
it's like you get 100% of the advantage there instead of splitting it among two other players, right?
Yeah, you're giving when you're countering something off, unless you are like very far ahead and whatever they're doing is trying to put you back. The other 2 players are benefiting from what you're countering.
Yes, unless you're just protecting your own stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And so sometimes the best thing to do if you're playing with the people that you know are playing counter magic is to try to wait for them to use their counter magic first. And I think the big pitfall here is that you have a counter spell and someone casts something big and you're 4th in priority order and you just say in response, and the other 2 players that are playing blue and have counter magic that they might have used for this thing go, cool, all right, go ahead, man. Like that's having someone skip priority order and counter something that you were planning on using resources for is potentially one of the best feelings in Magic. Absolutely.
So for you, the smart player who's going to outsmart the system, let other players use their counters before you use yours.
Yes. And the other thing is use your counters to like politic, right? Is if you have someone, so in a CDH setting, sometimes what will happen is someone has like a Pact of Negation. A Pact of Negation is a 0 mana counterspell, But when it comes back to your turn, you have to pay 5 mana on your upkeep, or you lose the game, right? You have to pay 3 blue. And so what people will often do is say, hey, listen, this person is going to win the game with this spell. I have a Pact of Negation. I can use this Pact of Negation, but that means this next person is going to win. And I don't know if I can pay for my Pact of Negation on my next turn, but I maybe might be able to. I'd like to ask for a draw. And sometimes people will politic their way into calling a draw when someone is like potentially going to win because they're like, listen, I can stop this, but this next person's going to win. And they politic their way into that. You don't want to do that in casual. We're not politicking our ways to draws in casual, but I think you do something similar of like, hey, listen, they'll win the game if they do this. I need to counter this. And even if you're going to counter it anyways, maybe you can like eke something out of it. If you're playing with me, I'll probably be like, I don't know, man. Like they win or you counter it. So like, but it's worth trying.
But if you're playing with me, I'll at least try and get a turn out of immunity out of it.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I love it. That's awesome. Well, and there are plenty of ways that you can play around counterspells. And overall, I think if there was one key takeaway from this episode, I think the best advice we can give in terms of counterspells is that you should be playing as though there's always a counterspell at the table. Just assume that there is always going to be a counterspell available.
Yeah, if you're prepared to have your spell countered, it feels way less bad to have that happen.
Yeah.
With the exception of mana drain. Mana drain.
I thought you were going to say free counterspells.
I am going to say free counterspells as well. With the exception of someone having no mana and countering something for free in an environment where you don't expect that to happen, that feels very bad.
Yes.
And a really good reason.
But second to that is mana drain because it is so incredibly broken and needs to be on the game changers list. Do you want to tell a story about mana drain?
Sure, yeah. So Kelton and I were playing a Magic game 2 days ago, and I was playing Garth, and he was playing his new Pyrrh and Toothy deck. Mm-hmm. And it's a Simic control deck, and I know he has counter magic. And I thought, you know what? I have some floating mana. I'm going to throw a Brain Geyser out there, and if it gets countered, whatever. So I cast a Brain Geyser with my floating mana, thinking like he'll just offer you can't refuse or whatever. This will be fine. I'll just like on my next turn try to see if I can find something else to do. And he casts a mana drain in his first main phase. And so, great, that gets countered. He gets 6 colorless mana in his second main phase, and now he can cast his commander Toothy again. Mana drain is so good. It's so good. I don't understand the logic of not putting it on the game.
I think it needs to be on the game changers list. Yeah, I think it does. It's just it gives you so much acceleration, and there's so many ways to use it. And it's also the kind of spell where you're more incentivized to just spend it early as a ritual instead of like waiting to use it as a counter spell.
Yeah, absolutely. You counter someone's 4 mana commander, and now you have 4 additional mana. It's a free nearly seething song on your next turn to just like cast anything that you want. It's crazy.
It is nuts. It's really, really good. So keep that in mind as you're playing. Just think, hey, which of my opponents might have counterspells? Which you can. It's actually pretty easy to tell, right? The number of blue pips on the table, the number of open blue pips can give you an idea if there's a counterspell coming. So just wait for an opening. After someone else gets countered, or you see that they're tapped out, wait till you have protection. Maybe even try running out a different threat first. Run out something that you don't mind getting countered before you play your big play that's going to win you the game.
Yeah, sometimes I will either run something smaller out first and then play my bigger thing, or if I'm worried it's a counterspell that's like counter it unless they pay 2 or unless they pay X or whatever, then I'll run the big one like medium-sized thing out with the resources to pay for it, and then play my smaller thing that I'm not as concerned about and hope and see if they counter that, when I am tapped out or whatever. So there's ways to play around it, and you're more cognizant of playing around it when you are more wary of counterspells and aware that they can happen. And I think that's just an important mindset to have. And sometimes I think you can kind of go in and out of, right? As I've started playing less counterspells, I've started expecting counterspells less. And so when they do happen, I'm like, oh, dang, but I'm not playing counterspells,
Sure.
And so I'm trying to get better at managing my expectations for counterspells and deciding how many I feel like are appropriate to run in my decks as well. And I think it's just kind of a balance and something to talk to your play group about as well.
Definitely. It varies playgroup to playgroup. There's quite a few players in our playgroup that just don't run very many counterspells. And so I think in general, like our play group has moved in that direction. Though I think we all have decks that run a lot of counterspells for higher power games.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So let's talk about which ones to play. You mentioned some of the most egregious ones, some of the most powerful ones. I think the big ones, I think the most powerful ones are going to be the free ones like Fierce Guardianship and Force of Will, along with Mana Drain. So let's read these. So Fierce Guardianship is 2 and a blue for an instant. If you control a commander, you may cast the spell without paying its mana cost, and you get to counter target non-creature spell. And then do you want to read Force of Will?
Yeah, Force of Will is 3 blue for an instant. You may pay 1 life and exile a blue card from your hand rather than pay the spell's mana cost. Counter target spell. Pretty good. Pretty dang good.
Yeah, like you mentioned, I do think the reason these ones can feel bad is if you're not expecting them, if you're at a lower power table, right? And I think that's what the Game Changer list has really done well, is to prevent these, for the most part, from showing up at lower power tables.
Yeah, well, it just negates half of the advice we just gave, right? Half of the advice we just gave was look for a window, wait for a blue player to tap out, and then maybe cast your threats.
Yeah.
And so if you do that and then your stuff gets countered anyways, that feels like exceptionally bad if you weren't in an environment where you felt like you should be expecting that.
Yeah, totally. You can still get hit with denial. What's the new sacrifice one?
Oh, Flare of Denial.
Flare of Denial. Yeah.
Yeah, but the thing I like about Flare of Denial, even though it's free, is that it does represent like an actual cost for the person playing the deck because it's a non-token creature, and so you've had to like upfront. It's kind of like Glen Elendra if Glen Elendra was free to counter something, right?
Yes.
Like, though it's not as telegraphed as Glen Elendra, so it can still feel kind of bad. At least I had to sacrifice, my commander.
And it cost you 2 cards.
Yeah.
The other big one that I think to watch out for is Mana Drain. This is blue for an instant counter target spell. At the beginning of your next main phase, add an amount of colorless mana equal to that spell's mana value.
Yeah, this card's gross.
When I got you with this on Monday, I surprised you by using my mana in my second main phase because I feel like that's something that actually doesn't happen very often.
yeah. A lot of times, Mana Drain, you like cast on someone else's turn and you get it in your first main phase. And because that's the only play pattern I've ever seen with Mana Drain, I forgot that it's just your next main phase. And so I was like, first of all, wasn't expecting Mana Drain, didn't even think about Mana Drain as a possibility. And then secondly, was like, oh man, this is like, I didn't realize you could do that right now. I thought next we had a turn or something to wait for you to use this mana. But yeah, it was great. It was really good.
So let's get into some of the ones that you're going to see more commonly in that like low to mid power slot. We're going to share a few of our favorites. We'd love to hear from you what your favorite counterspells are. One of the ones that Spencer and I are quick to put in our decks, it's one of the first counterspells that we ever put in, are an offer you can't refuse. So blue mana for an instant counter target non-creature spell. Its controller creates 2 treasure tokens. Can I say that sometimes I'm super happy when someone gives me an offer I can't refuse? Because the mana is actually super helpful for what I'm trying to do.
Yeah. It feels, an offer you can't refuse feels pretty good when you're confident you're not giving your opponent mana to like do something else. Mm-hmm. I think it feels best when someone's casting a big threat and you're trying to stop them. It feels really good when you've already tried to interact with something and they offer you can't refuse your own thing if it's not like an incredibly big threat. And now you're like, sweet, I have like a little mana coming back. I don't know. I think offer can't refuse is very good. I will say this is actually not the first one I put in my decks.
Really? What's the first one you put in your deck?
Because I've been indexing really heavily towards playing counterspells that work both as like removal and protection. I have been indexing towards things like Counterspell or other related spells that say counter target spell, because I want to be able to hit creatures, artifacts, enchantments, instant sorceries, or whatever, like any of the threats my opponents have coming, and also to be able to protect my own stuff, which may not be a creature that's going to be hitting my thing, but I just like the flexibility of like, no, this stops anything. Like this
Yeah,
it's like a destroy target permanent effect in blue that doubles as a protection effect.
that I think that shows a little bit about how you and I see counterspells differently. Because I think I mainly put counterspells in my deck for protection. I think that's like my main thought as to like my Pure and Toothy deck that we were just talking about runs quite a few counterspells, but for the most part, it's to protect my game plan of make Toothy really big, draw a bunch of cards, and then hit someone in the face. So like I do primarily run those counterspells for interaction. So most of them are like the really hyper efficient ones, like an offer you can't refuse, that are just going to hit non-creature stuff. But that's probably a mistake. I should probably be giving myself the advantage of more flexibility.
Yeah, I do think Pure and Toothy is an example of a very proactive deck where you are using it to protect yourself because you're going to be popping off. Like the goal of the deck is to pop off, and it will happen, and so you just need to protect your own things. I have, when I'm putting counter magic in decks, most recently it's been for like more control decks. Like I was like trying to figure out which ones I wanted to play in Wilhelt a while ago, which I've since taken apart. Wilhelt, rest in peace. But because I was playing in a more controlling deck, I needed to be able to stop like big creature threats that were coming down, or to be able to protect my own stuff if like I don't know, like a board wipe or like a farewell or something was about to hit. And so that's kind of how I've been thinking about it more, is like I like it to hit both directions. But if you're trying to like just turbo out and you know, not necessarily combo off, that's Pure and Toothy doesn't like go infinite, but it goes infinite enough, right? With 100 cards in your deck.
It accrues enough advantage.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's appropriate for what you're doing. I think in a different shell, you want to be playing maybe different counterspells, just because, like we were saying, blue. That's the only way blue interacts with the board, and certainly like other colors can as well. Not the only way they interact, but a main way in which they interact. And so, I like leveraging that portion of it as well.
That's good to know. No, I think that's a way that I could grow in how I play counterspells.
Well, I don't know. I think you're doing it right for the deck you're playing counterspells in currently, but that's just kind of my maybe not so hot take on counterspells.
I love it. Well, here's another non-creature one. It's one that I forget about a lot. It's negate. 1 and a blue for an instant counter target non-creature spell. I think I forget about this because it's a common, and I see it all over the place in my bulk bins. And I'm just like, oh yeah, this isn't one of the ones I play. And then if I stop and compare it to the ones I do play, I'm like, wait, this is actually really good.
Yeah, I think it's easy to look at things like an offer you can't refuse, or one we're talking about later. I guess we'll read it right now, Swan Song, which it counters an enchantment, instant, or sorcery, and then creates a 2/2 bird. So it just doesn't hit artifacts or planeswalkers, right? That's like the only two non-creature spells it doesn't hit. But virtually will hit everything that you're wanting it to. Yeah, battles too. Sure. Yeah. Okay. Battles. You got me. It doesn't hit battles. But the reason people are often looking at those is because they're 1 mana, right?
Yeah, I know. That's why I want to put them in my deck.
Right. Yeah. And negate being 2 mana can feel a lot worse in some situations where you're trying to like utilize your mana and then just leave 1 available for something else. Hitting a non-creature spell like with no contingencies of like maybe you can pay for it or whatever is so good. I think negate needs to see more play. Maybe it does see a lot of play, but I do the same thing as you. It's not like a premier counterspell, and so I don't think of it on my short list of counterspells I want to play. And then when I build a budget deck, I'm like, oh, negate's like 30 cents. This card's nuts, and I put like negate in.
Totally.
You know.
And I think that the downside of it being 1 extra mana is actually not that big, because if you're playing counterspells, if you're playing blue, and if you're trying to play instant speed, you have other stuff to do with that mana anyway. And so it's okay to leave up that 1 additional mana. I actually don't think it's that big of a downside, but it looks like one, I think.
Yeah. I think it's your people when they make like their mental tier lists go, what are the 1 mana like counterspells, and like what are the 2 mana counterspells, and behind Fierce Guardianship, Forcible Mana Drain, at the like non-1 mana spells, and then offer Swan Song and whatever, like it falls pretty far down on the list, but I don't think it needs to, especially because some of those like are above the power level that you want to be playing potentially some of the time.
Exactly. All right, you want to read our next one? This one is sweet. It's a newer one.
Yeah, Sink into Stupor is one that got slept on a lot from Modern Horizons 3. It is 1 blue for an instant that says return target spell or non-land permanent opponent controls to its owner's hand. So it's both bounce. I guess that's one of the ways that that blue interacts the most, right? Is bounce. Which I think is very good.
But not everything hits non-land permanents.
Yeah, not everything does. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of it's creatures.
Yeah. So Singing to Stupor does, though. And on the backside, it's a land that taps for blue and enters tapped unless you pay 3 life, which is crazy that it can enter just untapped as a blue land. This card
is so good.
This card is crazy. I think it's gone down in price a little bit. We talk about price a lot on the show, maybe too much, but I'm so happy this one's going down a little bit because it's such an insane card, and I think people need to put this in their collection.
Can I tell you one thing I don't like about this card? And it's such a horrible reason to not like this card.
Yeah, please tell me.
It feels like an auto-include in every blue deck. Like, I cannot think of a reason why every blue deck less than 4 colors would want to play this.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, that's something I've been trying to, I've been debating with myself since June of last year, I guess, when this set released.
Yeah.
Was like, hey, do I just run Seek into Stupor and what the black version of this, whatever the black one is? Do I just run all of these in every... Because they're both interaction, right? Do I just run these in place of a swamp and an island in every deck? And I think the answer is kind of yes. I don't think there's a reason you shouldn't be, especially even more so than something like Malakir Rebirth, which is a very good card. Or
and I
Ball
play
Get Recovery.
Malakir Rebirth and Ball Get Recovery in almost every black and green deck.
Yeah, right. And they're phenomenal and they're really good. And these are just a step again better because they're actually interaction for someone else's board state and can enter untapped if you need them. Yeah, which is crazy.
That's crazy.
Yeah,
the art on this is also pretty cool. I also haven't ever
sick.
looked closely enough at the art. This thing's pretty sweet.
I really love the art on this one too.
Yeah, that's cool.
I think it's very good. The next ones are I guess this next one I don't think we're gonna talk about multiple of them, but it's Remand, which is
one of my favorites.
Yes, kind of. There's a couple cards that have effects like this, but it is 1 in a blue for an instant. Counter target spell. If that spell was countered this way, put it into its owner's hand instead of putting it into its owner's graveyard. So it's kind of like returning it to its owner's hand, except that it actually has to counter it, so it doesn't get around things that are uncounterable. And then you draw a card. So
Wait,
that's
Sink into Stupor gets around uncounterable.
Yeah, so does Reprieve because
it doesn't actually counter it.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Remand
is still very good though. I mean, the fact that it cantrips, that's one of the main things that you're worried about when you're playing Counterspells is that you're down a card. Not so with Remand. And I think that these types of cards that just delay the spell, like we are going to talk about Reprieve and some of the other bounce spells, they get better the higher power level you are, because the higher power level you are, the shorter the game's going to be. And the more you just need that threat, not on the stack or not on the battlefield right now.
Yeah, with the exception of free interaction, like Fierce Guardianship and stuff, where they can just be okay, I play this again.
I'll cast it again. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
But even then, Force of Will is kind of hard to cast a second time if you're not super heavy blue.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. No, not all of them will have the same kind of performance of being able to do it again. So I think it does and it doesn't. It does at higher power levels because time is a little more precious and turn cycles are a little more precious, so you can maybe take advantage of that card being put back into their hand. But also it can be dead if someone is casting a deflecting swat or a Fierce Guardianship or whatever, and they're just able to loop it.
I think I'm kind of talking myself into this being one of my favorite counterspells because it does scale well with power level in that it's, like you said, it just buys you a little bit more time at a high power level, lets you win.
Yeah.
But at a low power level,
it doesn't take away someone's thing.
It doesn't take away someone's thing.
Yeah. I think it's really fun.
Great.
I think it's on my short list of ones that I want to play, and I think it kind of fits in a similar category as the next one we're going to read, which is Arcane Denial. Arcane Denial takes something, they both kind of do the same thing where they replace themselves in your hand, which is very good. Remand has the added benefit. I guess Arcane Denial, depending on what your perspective is, Arcane Denial has the added benefit of actually putting the thing in the graveyard.
Sure.
but Remand puts that thing back in their hand, which is like, the kind of a friendlier version even of Arcane Denial. But let me read Arcane Denial, because here's what it does. It's 1 and a blue for an instant. It counters target spell, and its controller may draw 2 cards at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep, and you draw a card at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep. So it kind of does the same thing as Remand. Doesn't put that exact spell back in their hand. Might make them whiff on some stuff, but might put some gas in their hand, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
And so for that reason, Arcane Denial actually has been my go-to counterspell as of late.
Nice. That's cool.
Because it hits any target. It puts the thing in the graveyard. It replaces itself in my hand, and it's like kind of nice and gives the person a card.
It's it feels
cards.
more casual. I also love that Remand and Arcane Denial have both seen reprints recently, and the price has been driven down a lot with both of them.
Yes, 100%. 100%.
This next one is also new, I guess, as of last year. Last year. When was Outlaws?
This year. No, last year.
Last year.
That's crazy.
Last year, I know. I feel like I'm in a time warp. 3 steps ahead is blue plus, because it is an instant with spree. So if you pay an additional 1 in a blue, so 1 blue, counter target spell, you can pay an additional 3 to create a token that's a copy of target artifact or creature you control, and then you can pay an additional 2 to draw 2 cards and then discard a card. Flexibility is the name of the game with these counterspells. Like, counterspells themselves are flexible, and then you can add 2 more modes to this one to give it just way more flexibility. And I think I have cast every version of this spell. Every one of these modes has utility, which is awesome.
Yeah. So okay, can I ask you a question about this? So, because it is below rate, it's below rate for any of those things, right? Except for maybe create a token copy of a creature, right?
That one is I mean, even then, it's a worse clone. Clone is
I mean, it's an instant speed. Arenicus' veiled duplication, but not for legendaries, I guess.
And it doesn't give it flying.
Yeah, I forgot it does that. So, but it's kind of below rate for all those things. But the benefit is like if you have 5 mana available, you counter something, and then you draw 2 cards and discard a card. Or if you have 6, which feels very good. So, but here's my question: is can I interest you in Mana Confluence?
Ooh,
not Mana Confluence.
Mystic Confluence.
Mystic Confluence.
Yeah, Mystic Confluence is 3 blue for an instant. Choose 3. You may choose the same mode more than once. Counter target spell unless its controller pays 3. Return target creature to its owner's hand. Draw a card. So this is better as long as you're certain that you're paying 5 mana and that they can't pay the 3.
Yeah, exactly. So
this one is good. I mean, this one's not bad.
I've never made that comparison before in my head, because 3 steps ahead is like very good and sees play in standard currently. And the flexibility of it just being a counter spell when you don't have the mana to do the other things is very, very good.
Yeah.
But it's funny because I have never been able to find a deck where I actually want to run Mystic Confluence and then hold the 5 mana open each turn cycle for a Mystic Confluence potentially. And it makes me wonder...
Do you know where I think Mystic Confluence is super good, though? Is in budget.
It's in budget, yep, for sure.
It's 19 cents. I mean, like, 3 steps ahead is $6, and in budget, Mystic Confluence does enough of an impression of 3 steps ahead that I think you're like always happy playing this. The bummer is that I think I think this is one of the cards that does kind of incentivize you to counter someone's spell. Like, even if it's not the best target. Because if you leave up 5 mana and you have nothing else to do with it, you have to cast this spell.
Yes.
You cannot take a turn off with this spell. And I think the best mode is counter something, draw 2 cards. I do think that is the best mode for Mystic Confluence. Generally. Though returning a creature to its owner's hand and drawing 2 cards isn't bad either, but countering that creature is better. So I do feel like this does encourage you to just like snap off a counter spell when you wouldn't otherwise.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. I think it's
though I've seen a Mystic Confluence draw 3.
Yeah,
like,
I mean, there's a world where you do that. I do think it does incentivize potentially not very happy play patterns.
Yeah. It's still very good though. Let's
I'm gonna be honest with you. I just looked up Hinata Dawncrowned.
Okay.
Because
I don't remember this card. Can you read it?
Yeah, it's from Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. It is 1 and Jeskai mana for a 4/4 legendary creature, Kirin Spirit with flying and trample. And it says spells you cast cost 1 less to cast for each target, and spells your opponents cast cost 1 more for each target. So it turns Mana Confluence into a blue bounce 3 creatures, or blue counter target spell bounce 2 creatures.
So sick.
Which is insane.
I think I just found your next budget commander.
Well, can I tell you, we've been talking about our next budget night being I got a little distracted just now because we talked about our next budget night being 250, not the top 250 commanders. You have to do something
On
below
EDH
that.
Rec.
On EDH Rec, and Hinata Dawn Crown is 245.
Oh, 245! We're safe. Everybody, we're safe.
I know. So we better hope that a bunch of those Final Fantasy commanders bump this out of the 250. So
it might take a few months to do that. We'll see.
And the other sad thing is that Tasigur is 249, so I can't make a budget Tasigur deck.
Nice. You can't make your 4th Tasigur deck.
Yeah, exactly.
That's awesome. Okay, well, the next one, let's move on ahead. We only have a couple more in this section. Let's talk about Narset's Reversal. This is blue for an instant. Copy target instant or sorcery spell, then return it to its owner's hand. You may choose new targets for the copy. I like this one. This one's fun, and also just got reprinted, so it's much cheaper.
Yeah, I've never played Narset's Reversal. I think I've seen one played once in a game that I've played. It's a very cool card. I forgot it was instant or sorcery. It seems very good if it's like anything.
It'd be better if it was non-creature, for sure.
Yeah, but it is still very good. The fact that you get to, like, they still get their thing later, potentially. You get a copy of it, and I think that's pretty good.
I think this is a very good casual counterspell, and I think the only downside is that it was prohibitively priced because it was a rare.
Yes.
And it had one printing. And I think the fact that now it's $2, I think this falls right into line with like Remand and Arcane Denial for like really good casual counterspells.
Yep. I think that's very true. I think it's very true. I think in Hinata Dawn Crown, I'm going to run C double instead. But I think.
Oh, you are banking hard on Final Fantasy. I better schedule that now so that we don't give those Final Fantasy commanders time to make the list.
Oh man.
That's awesome.
Okay, and then our last one here is delay. Yeah, so this is we mentioned that Remand like delays things. This one literally does delay things. It is delay. It is 1 in a blue for an instant counter target spell. If this spell is countered this way, exile it with 3 time counters on it instead of putting it into its owner's graveyard. If it doesn't have suspend, it gains suspend. Can I say this is one that I actually want to play a lot more, and actual suspend, which is removal that does the same thing but puts 2 time counters on. A creature, exiles a creature, puts 2 time counters on it.
Yeah.
I think this mechanic is very fun and very fun in a casual setting where you just like are trying to get rid of something for a little bit, maybe kick the can down the road for a tiny bit.
Can you tell me why you like this better than Remand? Because they gotta cast it for free.
Yeah, I don't think I like it better. I don't think I like it better than Remand. I think Remand is better. I think this is a very fun spell that I would be very inclined to put in like a low power deck.
Okay, I do agree.
As an option for like protecting myself, but also they get to cast it for free in 4 turns. 3 turns.
3 turns, because when you take the last one off, right?
Yeah, when you take the last one off. Yeah, so it's not like a stun counter that you have to take the last one off and then it untaps the next turn. Yeah. So 3 turns, but still 3 full turn cycles to try to cast that thing again, which is
that's a good point.
A non-trivial amount of turn cycles.
Yeah, and the fun thing about casual. And the fun thing about casual is that, and lower power decks in casual, is that you're probably going to make it to 3 turns from then. And they're probably going to still get to cast the thing. And that is also fun for them.
Yeah, and in a higher power environment, you may not make it those 3 turns, and it may just work out.
So it scales pretty well.
Yeah, and the thing with like a Remand is that it also scales pretty well in that sense, except that like if they want to try their next turn, they can just like cast the thing again on the next turn. Where delay is like, no. You have to
hopefully
wait
that extra
turns.
card that you get to draw off of Remand draws you another counterspell.
Yeah, exactly. You can find a better counterspell to deal with their thing.
I thought we should take just a second for you to share with us what counter magic looks like in CEDH, because some of you may be listening to this list and thinking, wow, this is missing some of the most powerful ones. So you only talked about Fierce Guardianship, Force of Will, and Mana Drain. There are some other really high power ones that you should play in your high power decks and are specifically very good in CEDH. What are some of we don't necessarily need to read all the cards. I can show them on the screen though.
Sure.
What does that look like and why are they good in CEDH?
Yeah, so these are we were talking about a bunch of these, and you had some of these on the list originally. And as I was looking through the list, the thing that kept popping to mind, it was like, yeah, I think some of these are very good for casual, and I'd be really excited to play them in casual. And some of these are more things that I would be interested in playing in a CDH environment. And some of these that are very good in casual are lower on my list in a CDH environment, not just because there are better ones in CDH, but because maybe they just like scale poorly with CDH. So I think like a primary example of that is an offer you can't refuse. It's been a pretty premier counterspell, except that now I feel like more and more it's become a problem for me where if I cast an offer you can't refuse and it counters their free spell and gives them 2 treasures, now they have 2 treasures to cast their swan song or their own offer you can't refuse or something to be able to like continue interacting with me. And so as a result, it's kind of fallen down my list, even though it is like objectively one of the best counterspells that exists. On rate. Yeah, exactly. But more often than not in CDH, you're looking for like free interaction. So things like Force of Negation, where you can pitch a card, and you can only do it on someone else's turn for free, but it's a free spell. Pact of Negation, which we talked about, it's free. Mindbreak Trap is free if someone has cast 3 or more spells. Mental Misstep is free, but only for one mana spells. Or things like Flusterstorm that benefit off of someone having cast a lot of spells on their turn, or there being like a pretty involved stack that is going to give you more storm triggers to counter a bunch of different things. Those are the types of things that I think are performing very, very well in CDH that I don't play in casual, but I think are worth pointing out as like very powerful counterspells. In fact, I did play Force of Negation and Pact of Negation in casual not so long ago, and I probably would in fairly high power casual, but not all of these because the environment is just entirely different, and they're not going to scale down very well at all.
Yeah. Yep. Thank you. I thought that this would be a very fun conversation to have with you because of all of your CEDH and Sultai experience.
Sure, yeah. Exclusively Sultai CDH experience.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, those two have a huge overlap on the Venn diagram.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's talk about if you're lucky enough to not be playing mono blue and you have access to some other colors, or maybe you don't have blue available at all, what are some of the other counterspells that you can be playing? Some of them are Dovin's Veto for white and a blue. It's an instant. This spell can't be countered. Counter target non-creature spell. That first line of text is pretty good, isn't it?
Yeah, that was pretty solid. Yeah, the fact that it's just like it's a nope that can't be noped is pretty.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
It's pretty solid. Yeah, and then you have things like in red, you have access to things like Red Elemental Blast and Pyroblast, which kind of fill a similar role to some of the spells I was talking about earlier that are very good for protracted stack battles where they're kind of counterspells for counterspells.
Yeah.
And so it's protecting yourself on that front, but they also like destroy blue permanents, which is not nothing.
Totally.
And
it's
so
great, in fact. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. The Rhystic Study is a blue permanent, and so it can kill a Rhystic Study.
Good point. Good point.
So yeah, pretty cool spells. And I think if we're talking about not being in blue, I think another really cool one is Mana Tithe. Though that one can feel bad sometimes because and doesn't scale very well with casual. I think this one actually follows a similar play pattern to what we're talking about with like Mana Confluence, where if you have 1 mana, you cast it early, and then just try to hope to get somebody, and then it just kind of like feels bad because it doesn't do anything late in the game.
Yep, I do think that's very true. Another white spell that I do think is a little more flexible is Reprieve. So it's the same thing as Remand, kind of. 1 in a white, return a spell to its owner's hand and draw a card.
So good. It's a gotcha. It's a gotcha that in white, that if you have white open, no one's like, they're going to counter my thing. And then boom.
This was one of the best things we got out of Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, so
and we got a lot of good stuff out of Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. Another one that was pretty similar, I guess, to is No More Lies from Murders of Color Manor. I guess not similar, but it is a counter. It's a counter spell. We haven't talked about any counter spells that you pay mana to like prevent the effect. I guess Mystic Confluence does that. But you counter a spell unless the controller plays 3 mana. But if a spell is countered this way, you exile it instead, which is a pretty solid effect if you're worried about someone getting something back. Much better than putting it in their hand, but even more so better than putting it in their graveyard.
Do you think between this and Dovin's Veto, because they have the same mana cost, which one would you rather play? Because Dovin's Veto is uncounterable, but it only hits non-creature spells. This one hits any spell, but they can pay 3 to negate it. But it exiles it.
Yeah. I don't know.
This
I
card
don't think
has
I'm
to be great.
Yeah, I don't think I'm. Here's the thing: is if I'm in blue, I don't think I'm deep enough. I'm not playing enough counterspells that these make it onto my list. Just
Really,
because,
that either of them do.
just
Because
because
you're
I
only
can
playing
play.
like 6 to 8 of them.
Yeah, I mean, I'm
Yeah.
playing like 3 or 4 often, and if I'm playing counterspell, arcane denial, delay, and remand, then like I don't need to like
Yeah.
dive farther into the list.
Okay,
of,
that's probably true.
But I do think they're very good. I think they're very good. I think No More Lies currently has a place because it's in standard because cards rotate out of standard, and so
Because
like
Counterspell's not in standard. Counterspell's not in
exactly.
standard, right?
Yeah, no, I don't think it is currently.
No. We also have a few that we wanted to recommend that maybe don't see quite as much play, but have a lot of utility and that we think are pretty fun that we enjoy playing. This first one, I actually don't play, and I want to talk about why. It's Wash Away. It's a blue mana for an instant counter target spell that wasn't cast from its owner's hand. But if you pay 1 blue because it has a cleave cost, instead you just counter target spell. This is a 1 mana commander counter.
Yeah, and that's it. And maybe someone's playing a deck that plays stuff from exile, or they're playing stuff that flashes back or something like that, and you might be able to get that. But for the most part, this is countering someone's Mirim, or this is countering someone's
And that
Muldrotha.
even though like Myram is probably one of the best targets for a counterspell.
Yeah,
It still feels bad, right?
100%. Yeah, it feels pretty rough. Yeah, I mean, anything that more often nowadays, a lot of commanders have ward, and a lot of
Yeah.
people are playing commanders with ward, and it gives you a sense of security that they're not gonna you're gonna be able to stick them, and you're gonna be able to make it to your next turn
Yep.
with those commanders. Those are the best commanders to counter.
Yeah.
and so it probably one, it's best to counter them than to try to pay the ward to remove them later. And 2, it feels extra bad because you're playing these decks because you want the confidence that they'll stick on the board for longer. And so Wash Away, we talked about it a little bit before the episode of why neither of us are playing Wash Away. First of all, the art is sick, and it makes me want to play Wash Away more than I do. But it turns into a Drannith Magistrate for a single player that you get to just like give the middle finger to, right?
And Drannith Magistrate is a very good card, but there's a reason you don't see it at lower power decks.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Because we're all here to play commander. I'm not going to prevent you from playing your commander.
Yeah.
And also, like, that's not going to lose me the game more often than not.
True.
You playing your commander is not going to lose me the game. And so I'd rather play Counterspell and counter something meaningful than play Wash Away and just keep one person from playing their commander once.
Great point. But if you really hate playing against your friend's commander, then you can just play Wash Away and just counter for 1 blue mana.
But if Kelton is shuffling up Mirim, then I'm going to sideboard Wash Away into every deck that I play.
You're going to sneak it in while I'm shuffling.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. The next one on
pull
this
it out
list,
of my sleeve.
The next one on this list is Invert Polarity. This is also fairly new. It's from Modern Horizons 3. Blue, red for an instant. Choose target spell, then flip a coin. If you win the flip, you gain control of the spell and may choose new targets. If you lose the flip, you counter it.
Yeah, can I tell you, there are so many cards that say flip a coin that I just immediately don't read because I'm like, I don't care.
Yeah.
Like,
well, because you think, the way you read this spell, you immediately think the last line is going to be, if you lose the flip, nothing happens. Like, that's what you think is going to happen. And you're like, this is a bad card. This is not a bad card. In fact, I think this is a very good card because you either get the spell for free or counter it.
Yeah.
And your opponent either way gets absolutely nothing.
Yeah, the only other effect I can think of that gives you control of a spell is Commandeer, and that costs 7 mana, or exiling 2 blue cards from your hand.
Yeah.
The fact that this just maybe does this, but like at best does this, and at best does this, and at worst doesn't. The only problem I see with
No,
this,
at worst it's a counter spell with an extra red mana attached.
right.
to
No,
it.
exactly. Yeah. At best takes the spell, and at worst doesn't take the spell, but counters it. The only problem I see with this is that often one of the things that I'm trying to counter is something like a board wipe or a farewell or something, and this doesn't help you with that in any way. And so
wait, oh sure. If
yeah,
it's a one-sided
it does.
board
It does.
Yeah.
Maybe once, maybe like or like
if it's a
50% of
raise the
time, I guess.
palisade, Actually, do you get to choose new modes? You don't get to choose new modes, right?
No, so they still said wizard or whatever,
Wizards,
and your
yeah.
zombies all get bounced. So 50% of the time, this works as a counterspell, which is why I don't really play it, because the upside of like copying the spell is really sweet. I just don't like. I don't know. I think it's fun. But I don't run it. But maybe I should. Which is why we have these in the try these list.
In the try these lists. Cool. Yeah, this one is the next one is one that you are trying, and I think you're pretty hot on.
Yes, it's Daze. It's 1 and a blue for an instant. You may return an island you control to its owner's hand rather than pay Daze's mana cost, and you counter target spell unless its controller pays 1 mana. Not in casual. I'm not hot on this one in casual, but I put this into my CDH deck recently because it's a free counter magic. And it feels really good to be able to have another piece of free counter magic because often people don't have the mana to pay for this while they're fighting you on the stack. And so I think it's sweet, and I'm going to keep giving it a try. I like it a lot.
Do you see this a lot in other people's CDH decks? And if so, is it the Mr. Krabs printing from the SpongeBob Secret Lair?
I don't see it a lot. I think mostly it's... I think the only decks I've really seen it in are like Rograk Silas lists, because they're turbo lists, turbo ad nauseum or turbo necropotence lists that hope to be able to get free interactions there because the lines are
as
kind
they're
of tight.
turning through the deck.
Yeah, because the lines are tight mana wise, right? You need to be able to interact without spending your mana. And I've not seen the Mr. Krabs printing yet, and I'm not gonna lie to you. I love SpongeBob so much, and I think it's really fun that they made a SpongeBob crossover. I don't want that printing. I think the other printings are so cool. They're
you like the
so
original,
cool.
the OG Nemesis printing?
Oh my gosh, the Nemesis printing, or the newest, the Eternal Masters printing, or if I really want to spend the big bucks, the Amonkhet Invocations printing, it
is
might be
really cool.
I think it might be one of the prettiest Invocations cards.
It is really cool.
Yeah,
it's sweet. It's like $200. That's crazy.
Yeah, no, it's cool.
The last two, I said the next two, they're also the last two that we're going to talk about are two of my favorites that I think that you should try if you haven't given them a try. One of them is sudden substitution to blue for an instant with split second, which means that as long as spell is on the stack, players can't cast spells or activate abilities that aren't mana abilities. And it says exchange control of target non-creature spell and target creature. Then the spell's controller may choose new targets for it.
Sweet. It's sick.
I love this spell.
It's a sick card.
I think it's so great.
Did I ever tell you that someone hit me with this in
a CDH game?
In a CDH game.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a sweet card.
It made me happy to know that this is CDH play.
Yeah, I mean, split second is really gross. Like, it just means that thing resolves. I don't play this, but maybe I should.
It's cool that special actions do get around this, though.
Like
I'm trying to remember
mana abilities. Like, I think there was one with like Hashaton and Angel's Grace, and you could discard a card.
Morph stuff.
Actually
gets around. I actually read a really interesting case study for a special ability I was like, oh yeah, that's actually really powerful. But I like this, that it's just like, nope, this is gonna happen. It's kind of like uncounterable. But it also prevents people from like removing the creature that you're swapping it with to like fizzle the spell, right? It just gives you like a lot of confidence that this is actually going to resolve the way you want it to.
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
That's sweet. Do you want to read the last one?
Yeah, let me read the last one here. The last one is Memory Lapse, which is one that Kelson has gotten me with a time or two. It is 1 and a blue for an instant. Counter target spell. If that spell is countered this way, put it on top of its owner's library instead of putting it into that player's graveyard. This might be one of the meanest counter spells.
You think so? Really?
So here's the thing.
I think it's only mean if it's a bad target.
That's maybe true. So here's my thoughts on it. Is Remand puts it back into their hand. They get to draw a card the next turn that's a different card, and maybe they get to cast that spell again, or they can opt to do something different. Something else, other counter spells put it into their graveyard. I think you're right. It's only mean if it's a bad target, because it sucks to be like, hey, I'm going to play. Like, I'm not I wasn't upset about it. It was whatever in the game that you countered.
But I got you with the mana rock.
My mana rock, and I drew it the next turn. But the fact that it blanks your next draw does feel like kind of bad.
Yeah.
But it's good. But it's very good to be like,
it's great.
nope, this thing's countered, and now you're gonna draw it next turn.
I think this is another really great casual one.
Yeah, 100%.
Like if I'm gonna round up some of my favorite casual ones, Memory Lapse, Sudden Substitution, Remand/Reprieve, Arcane Denial, Delay, Narset's Reversal. Like, they're fun. I think they're sweet.
Yeah, I mean, counterspells are fun. They're cool. They're very powerful. I think you need to play them with moderation. You need to kind of get a read for what your playgroup is expecting, what power level you're expecting to play.
Because we just covered so many counterspells.
Yeah.
There's such a range of how good they are, how powerful they are, how mean they are.
Yeah.
And so just you play counterspells because it's part of Magic, it's part of Blue, and it's how you interact with a lot of different stuff. And you need them, and that's great. And everyone should learn how to play around them by just expecting there to be one at the table.
Yep.
But pick your counterspells wisely because you get a lot of choice in which counterspells you play.
Yep. We didn't learn that lesson very well early on, and we're trying to learn it a little bit better. And we think you guys should learn it learn it with us as we're trying to be better about how many counterspells we play. Because we've read counterspells from Mystic Confluence to Mana Drain, and I think there's a wide range in between those of things that you can that are very playable,
and a lot more that we didn't add on this list. So let us know what your favorite counterspell is. And let us know if you want us to do episodes like this for other topics in the future, like protection or removal or ramp or whatever. And anyways, thank you all for listening. Make sure to subscribe, join our Discord. And until next time, remember to always pay the one.